Hello and welcome to DFS Coach Talk. It is Friday, May 5th, 2020. I am Andre Hanson, and I'm very excited today because we're making history here at DFS Coach Talk. Our first three-way podcast for an NFL breakdown, and so happy to be joined by Shane Caldwell and Brett Trimble. And Brett, I'm going to have to start with you because we did the Cowboys podcast yesterday, and Coach had a little message for you.
Yes, he did. He seems to really love his Cowboys and throwing shots at Eagles fans. But I just want to throw a quick reminder out there, Coach. I don't know if you remember that 1 week last year where the Cowboys needed a win to get in the playoffs, but um, hate to break it to you, the Eagles with the third string line somehow beat you. And, I do have to say it's a little disturbing, but fly, Eagles, fly.
That's right. Brett is our resident Eagles fan. So perfect timing here to back up yesterday's podcast where Coach was wearing his Cowboys blue and he was all fired up. And, that game at the end of the last year may have been a big turning point and sort of a win-win for Coach. I think that would probably be his response was, yes, the Eagles won. They got to go to the playoffs, but maybe that was the final nail in the coffin for Jason Garrett because he was certainly excited about Mike McCarthy yesterday. But just really
We all have our
striking.
opinions. We all have our opinions on Mike McCarthy. So
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. But just very striking looking at the numbers because I was giving Coach a hard time yesterday with the Cowboys outscoring their opponents by so much, only finishing 8-8, and the Eagles they scored 385 points last year. They gave up 354. Somehow they managed to go 9-7, get in the playoffs. They had if you compare that to Dallas's point spread, Dallas outscored its opponents by 82 more points over the course of the season than the Eagles. So that's 5 points a game extra, and yet somehow the Eagles won the division. So, Doug Peterson certainly gets the vote of confidence here for finding a way to win and get into the playoffs.
I do have to agree with that. I don't know what it is, but I feel like ever since Doug Peterson really came in for the team after the disastrous Chip Kelly era we have, I definitely see him putting a lot more confidence in the team, which in return, personally, I think that the players are able to perform and they're not being, so-called looked down on. They actually, can make a play when they need to make a play. Even though these last 3 years, I do have to say the Eagles have been very injury prone, which leaves a lot of holes in the lineup. But otherwise, I really do like Doug Peterson and how he runs this team.
Now, Shane, what are your initial thoughts on last season and as we transition into this season as sort of the impartial observer here of the Eagles?
Yeah, I think it really was a testament to their coaching staff and their veteran core of players that they have there that are Pro Bowl caliber players that they were able to go 9-7, even though they were decimated by injury, especially at important skill positions like wide receiver. So I think overall it was a pretty good season, being that really on offense they're ranked in the top 15 in all categories pretty much. They on defense they were top 10 in yards given up, which is pretty good considering they were a little limited on talent, especially in the secondary. So overall, yeah, I mean, the defense is still one of the best in the league at stopping the run. They were third against the rush, giving up only 90 yards per game. So, yeah, I think the Eagles had a great season considering all the injuries. And they won when they needed to. Sometimes it was ugly. They actually lost the turnover differential at -3, but they were able to come back and be resilient from that. So that means, this year, a lot of the Dallas fans sometimes tend to overhype, the results, and, they have a lot of exciting, draft picks, but they tend to kind of over sensationalize it a little bit within that group because it has such a large fan base. So I believe that the Eagles actually should be the favorite to win the NFC East, and it's going to be a really close battle between them and the Cowboys. But we'll go over some reasons why I think the Eagles are going to be the class of the NFC East this year.
Excellent. Yeah, Coach was ready to I think he was ready to give CeeDee Lamb Hall of Fame induction last night.
Yeah, and no mention of Ezekiel Elliott. We wouldn't want to mention him for
No.
daily fantasy. He's not in a position of value or anything. We
His
want to talk
value
about
goes without saying.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, if you're new to these podcasts, we are breaking down every NFL team 32 in a row, one day at a time from a DFS perspective. Thank you for tuning in. If you want to learn more, go to DFSCoachTalk.com. That's our website. You can become a member. We cover the NFL, the NBA, and Major League Baseball. We also cover the KBO right now. It's the only show in town. So if you're a member, our memberships are on hold, and we're giving out free advice, daily advice on the KBO lineups. So let's start to break down the 2020 version of the Eagles. And Shane, why don't you give us some initial thoughts about why you think the Eagles might be the class of the NFC East?
Okay, so everyone knows the Eagles are an elite run defense, okay? It all starts with Fletcher Cox, who's probably the best defensive tackle up there with Aaron Donald, a little slightly different player. But I would put him up there with Aaron Donald as the best defensive tackle in terms of just being a beast against the run, getting pressure up the middle. The guy's so quick and powerful and just got such good moves. So it all starts with Fletcher Cox being able to get after quarterback, but be elite against the run. Okay, so a lot of people attack their secondary because they were a little bit questionable and have had a lot of injuries at their cornerback position. Okay, they've always had Malcolm Jenkins in the back, kind of a core guy there who's been solid, but he's gone now, so they lost him. But they gained Darius Slay from the Lions in the trade. And Darius Slay is an elite, Pro Bowl shutdown corner, so he's going to be able to take care of one side. So if they're up against a top wide receiver, they may have him shadow and follow him across the formation, or they might just have Darius Slay take like the left side. Typically, he played the left side when he was in Detroit. So that really helps there. They also got Nickel Roby-Coleman, who's a very good slot corner from the Rams. So they've improved their secondary in that matter. A little concerned about the safety position. That's still going to be a little bit of question mark. Losing Malcolm Jenkins in terms of his leadership is going to be a big blow to them. But overall, they also added defensive tackle Javon Hargrave, who played with the Steelers, and he's going to be able to line up with Fletcher Cox in that 4-3 wide 9 defense. And he had 83.4 Pro Football Focus grade last year. So he's a solid player who can get pressure and stop the run. So when you combine those guys in there, their defensive line is elite. Their secondary is improved. I'm just a little concerned about the linebackers and the safeties. But overall, I think this defense is going to be dominant against the rush and slightly improved against the pass. And the offense is going to be able to control the ball even better this year and score more points and control the time of possession. So that's going to lead to more wins and definitely more success for this team, being that they're going to retool and get their weapons back. Subtractions, they lost Jordan Howard, who was a decent running back, Corey Clement, who was kind of a staple there. They lost Nelson Aguilar. I don't think any Eagles fans are too upset about that. Question marks on the O-line now.
Brett's shaking his head. I think
exactly. I don't think. Yeah, exactly. So now the offensive line was one of the best in the league. That's how they really have be ranked in the top 15 in almost all offensive categories. So despite not having any weapons, really, so the offensive line dominated. The only thing is Jason Peters is kind of contemplating whether he's going to come back or not. He's not under contract. So we'll talk about that. They also lost Halafali Vate. He went to the Lions, so he was a good backup offensive lineman. They lost Tim Jernigan, defensive tackle, Nigel Bradham, linebacker, Ronald Darby, the corner, and then the safety, Malcolm Jenkins. So they lost some key guys there. They paid Slay big money, so they had to cycle out some of those guys that were high priced guys, and they're going more of the youth movement. And then we'll talk about their draft. I think they had a really good draft, actually. I do like their draft there. So overall, yeah, it's an upgrade for this team. I think you can still attack them in the passing game, but it's not going to be as easy to identify that with top wide receiver ones because of Darius Slay there. But you will still be able to exploit them in a couple different categories that we'll talk about. What do you think there, Brett, for the additions, subtractions in terms of the outlook of this team?
The additions and subtractions, I really like most of it. There is a questionable situation at safety right now, even though the Eagles have brought in Will Parks from the Bronco. He's only on a 1-year deal, and there is still a bunch of young guys on the cornerback position on the roster that they were talking about moving to safety. One of the big names was Russell Douglas and the Green Goblin, Jalen Mills. He was a guy they were thinking about. He's a cornerback now, but maybe his play style fits better at safety. But we also have to keep in mind Malcolm Jenkins wasn't a pure safety on the Eagles roster. He also lined up at linebacker. He also was a cornerback. He was also, he was all over wherever they wanted him, he basically was there on the defense, which was nice. But at the same time, they have to keep in mind Malcolm Jenkins also wanted a huge contract, and, he's getting up in age. And necessarily, I feel like the Eagles position this offseason was to more or less make the roster young. Let's start, bringing in the young guys. Let's start bringing in the players that we can build together, and that they can, there's not that so much of like an age gap. It's more like a consistency around the whole entire team. And they also want to build a young team for Carson Wentz. He just signed that massive extension, and we'll get into it a little more with the Jalen Hurts, but with the draft stuff. But I do think the Eagles are trying to build a much younger roster, a roster that they could, have for a substantial amount of time rather than just, only, having all these veterans come in on a 1-year deal or a 2-year deal and stuff like that. I really do like what they did this offseason. It's definitely a step in the right direction. They are tackling the issues that they had last year at cornerback and safety and linebacker. So I'm excited to see how it pans out when camp comes around, and we'll see who makes the roster and who doesn't.
Well, Brett, I got to mention that nickname, the Green Goblin, that's one of the best nicknames I've heard recently. And I think Jim Schwartz, he's probably just hoping for about 11 of those guys to be able to, send flying around the field.
Yeah.
But as you mentioned, Shane, that passing game was the one area to be able to attack. And if they can make incremental improvements there, then this is going to be a very stout defense. Now, over on the offensive side, the big change in terms of the overall approach, the coaching staff, is that Mike Groh was fired. Doug Peterson is going to call the plays himself. So, Brett, how do you think about the offense and from a big picture? Do you like that move as an Eagles fan, that Doug Peterson's just going to run the show now?
I think it's an excellent move with the Philadelphia Eagles and moving forward. I do have to say I was never a huge Mike Groh fan from the very beginning. So for me personally, I honestly thought the offensive coordinator job should have gone to Deuce Stanley, who's also another big guy at the Eagles. He's basically Doug's right-hand man for the offense, and I was a little upset that Mike Groh got the job instead of him. But there is one thing that always sticks with me with Mike Groh is in 2018, when the Eagles had Golden Tate, and, that second half of the season was just a struggle with all the injuries and stuff. The one interview that just stuck with me is him saying how he didn't know how to implement Golden Tate into the offense. And that right there was just, like a huge red flag for everyone. I mean, you have a outstanding wide receiver, and the fact that you're not able to put him in your playbook, and he just wasn't good with the rookies either. Like, I felt like most rookies were struggling to, succeed with the Eagles. So I'm very happy to see him go. With Doug's play calling, I think he will do a terrific job due to, having Deuce, and he's also under Frank Reich during that Super Bowl run. So I think he knows how he can run the offense, and with the help with Deuce, I definitely think they'll be able to succeed with the younger running backs and the new additions they have at wide receivers.
Yeah, Deuce Staley now has the title of running backs coach and assistant head coach. So he's certainly right there in the inner circle for the Eagles. Now, Shane, let's start with the quarterback group here. Carson Wentz, back under center. Hopefully he can stay healthy. What's your outlook for him in 2020?
I'm very high on Carson Wentz. I was on him going into last year, and no one really could have foreseen that he's going to lose his top two wide receivers like super early in the year. But yeah, everyone talks about Carson Wentz. Some people say he's overpaid or overrated or injury prone. I don't care about any of that. I think Carson Wentz is an absolute baller, and I think that once he gets his rhythm and he has more weapons around him, he is going to be. I think he is flirting with top five quarterback potential in the fantasy world here, and a great daily fantasy target. Now, keep in mind, it was a complete disaster last year in terms of the weapons he had to throw to. I mean, he was throwing to guys that no one even knew for a while, right? And he was still QB 10. He was top 10 in terms of statistics with all those guys, right? So as long as the offensive line can hold up, like I said, I'm a little bit worried about the left tackle. I love Carson Wentz. He threw for over 4,000 yards last year. Okay. 27 touchdowns and only 7 interceptions. He also rushed for 243 yards and a touchdown as well. So really, for what he had to work with, this was elite level production to be a top 10 quarterback, considering he didn't have that many weapons. Yeah, he had some solid tight ends, but really those big chunk plays, you get those from the wide receiver game, and he didn't really have much production there on the wide receivers, as we'll talk about. So really high on Carson Wentz. I love him, and I love him in certain matchups. And I think that, again, I'll talk about the game script and game flow. I think that teams will still be able to attack the Eagles defense in the passing game, which sets you up for a nice high scoring shootout where Carson Wentz is throwing a lot and the opposing team is throwing a lot. I think even with Darius Slay, the teams are still going to be able to throw on him. So that's a good thing. So we're looking for some pretty good high scoring games with a lot of fireworks. I mean, once you have he's got his weapons back with Alshon Jeffrey and Deshaun Jackson, and then adding all these other guys that they have, this young group, getting rid of Nelson Aguilar, right? Someone that can catch the ball, that probably helps as well. Yeah, so big upgrade on Carson Wentz here. And I don't care what people say about injuries or inconsistencies. I'm big on this guy.
Well, it's funny how you describe him. You mentioned that ability to run. And that reminds me, Brett, of a guy that they drafted, some fellow named Jalen Hurts, kind of early in the draft. I think it was maybe the second round. And interesting pick with Wentz young in the prime of his career. What do you think about that?
At the time of the draft, I was honestly at a loss for words. The Eagles needed a bunch of other things, and they went and they pulled a shocker on us drafting Jalen Hurts. But I do have a good point that people tend to forget. So you remember when the Eagles won the Super Bowl and Carson Wentz got hurt in week 17, and then we had Saint Nick carry us all the way to the Super Bowl, and we won the Super Bowl. I think it's pretty crucial to have a backup quarterback. And Jalen Hurts, as much as he's a winner, I do really think that there will be times where he needs to take the team under the wing and carry this team and keep them afloat. Because as we know, Carson Wentz is not necessarily the most durable quarterback out there. So I do think he can be a great solid backup, and he can also learn a lot from Carson Wentz and taking on the leadership role down the road if he stays with us. But it is still a little shocking that we took a backup quarterback in the second round as someone as big as Jalen Hurts. There's going to be all these conspiracies out there about Carson Wentz maybe retiring and stuff out there, but I think they personally just did it just to make sure they had, a solid backup quarterback, instead of bringing in, for instance, Josh McCown, who was coaching high school football on the side and doing this for the Eagles. So, and then we lost Nick Foles to Jacksonville, and then Nate Sudfeld. I don't even think you guys know who he is, but I'm pretty sure we didn't even re-sign him. So
yeah, he's back, but he's only thrown 25 passes.
Yeah, and he's not relied on.
Started one career touchdown, so he's that traditional backup. But yeah, Hurts is more of the clone, if you will, to Wentz, the dual threat. And we talked about it with the Packers. I think it makes a lot of sense. And Brett, you really highlighted it there. Without Saint Nick coming in, the Eagles don't get that Super Bowl. And, the Packers have seen a real failure with their backup group when Aaron Rodgers goes down. So I think it makes sense to invest in a guy like Jordan Love. And I think it makes sense to invest in a guy like Hurts. It's just too valuable of a position in today's game, especially when you have a certain style like that. You want to match it with your backup. So I think it makes sense.
Yeah, I agree with. I really agree with both of you, Brett. Thanks for saying that, because I've been saying that since I heard a lot of the Eagles fans were mad about them drafting Jalen Hurts in the second round, and I was like, did they just forget? A few years ago, in 2017, they won the Super Bowl, and if they didn't have a good backup quarterback, they would not have won the Super Bowl. Like, they must not have very good memory. And I agree with Andrew, is the quarterback position is by far the most valuable position. And if you can draft a quarterback and hit on one, even if it's a backup, that's a super valuable position. And I think people are also discounting the fact that Jalen Hurts is a perfect fit for this offense. Being able to run he can run the read option out of this offense. He can run the RPOs out of this offense. So he is a multi-dimensional threat, similar to Lamar Jackson in terms of being able to run and pass. Now, he's not as elite as a runner as Lamar Jackson, but he's still a pretty physical runner. I mean, the stats he put up at Oklahoma last year were just ridiculous. It was video game stats. So I think it was a great pick. I don't know why people were upset about it. It doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah. Another quick thing I want to add on top of it is that there was a lot of speculation with the Eagles doing what kind of the Saints do with Taysom Hill with the 2-quarterback system. That idea was thrown out there, but personally, from a fantasy perspective, I really don't think you're gonna have to worry about that at all. If you per se take Carson Wentz in your lineup, there's just no reason why you shouldn't pick him just because there's some rumors going out there saying like, oh yeah, they're gonna split the game in half. They're gonna let Carson Wentz play a certain amount of time, and then they're gonna let Jalen Hurts take the ring from there. But from a DFS perspective, I do think Carson Wentz is still valuable each week, depending on the situation, even with Jalen Hurts as a backup. So it doesn't really change much.
Interesting. Yeah, that's going to be a very important topic to watch. Wentz piled up 28 touchdowns last year. And Shane, you sent us the stats. Jalen Hurts, he knows how to get into the end zone. 53 total touchdowns last year.
Yeah, no, that's just unbelievable. I mean, not only have 53 touchdowns, he passed for 3,851 yards, almost 70% completion percentage. Okay, over 11 yards per completion, only 8 interceptions, which wasn't bad considering he had 32 passing touchdowns. And then on top of that, his rushing volume was just ridiculous, which that's where you can see the kind of rumors of them being able to throw him in, the running game as well with Philadelphia to attack defenses and keep them off guard. Because 233 attempts is ridiculous for a quarterback, and these are designed runs for 1,298 yards, 5.6 average clip there, and 20 rushing touchdowns. So the guy was, again, with his physicality, breaking tackles and making defenders miss. He's a red zone threat. So he's a big-time red zone rushing and passing threat. And he even had a receiving touchdown. It shows you how multidimensional this guy is. So, yeah, so he is a weapon. He's a backup quarterback, and he's a weapon. And I can see them, as the year goes on, getting him involved in the offense more in certain packages. I don't see it early in the year, but I can see it later on as defenses try to adjust their offense, and then they want to try to throw him a wild card. That's what they'll do, is they'll mix him in there, similar how the Saints did last year. They started throwing their guy in there, Taysom Hill, towards the end of the year more, just to throw defenses off their game plan. So yeah, he's a weapon, and I think he's going to be great. He's improving all the time as a passer each year, which is good because he was really not that great at Alabama as a passer. But with his improvements in passing and everything that he's got going on, I think he's going to be great in this offense. Yeah,
the stat that really jumped out for me there is the one you highlighted, Shane, that Hurts had 233 rushing attempts. Yeah. And we just got done talking the other day about Washington's third-round draft pick, who's going to be a running back and a receiver, Antonio Gibson. He had 33 carries last year. So Jalen Hurts, as a quarterback, had 200 more carries than him. Yeah. I would be concerned for Wentz's fantasy value. But I agree with you. Maybe not at the beginning of the season, but I don't think Doug Peterson's just going to let him sit on the sidelines and do nothing. I think they're going to design some special packages for him. So we will continue to monitor that for you on a weekly basis. So let's transition to the running backs. Miles Sanders had quite the rookie year. I saw a stat on Twitter. It was Graham Barfield, so I'll give credit to him. He pointed out that there's only been 16 rookie running backs who've had over 1,200 yards from scrimmage on less than 250 touches. So Miles Sanders, was really efficient. He ended up averaging 5.8 yards per touch. And Shane, before we got on, you were breaking down the game log. He didn't start out quite so hot, but he really found his groove eventually.
Yeah, I loved Miles Sanders last year. I was locking him in, definitely coming down the stretch, and he helped me win a fantasy championship. So this guy was stuck behind Saquon Barkley at Penn State, so a lot of people didn't really know about him. But once he had his chance, his senior year at Penn State, I mean, the guy was a beast. He just never really got the notoriety because Saquon was so amazing there. But this guy just does everything. He's explosive. He's quick. He's got great agility. He's got great hands. He can pass protect. He can run between the tackles. He can get outside. He can do everything. So they really wanted to bring him along slowly. They weren't quite sure about him. Maybe, like you said, the offensive coordinator didn't like rookies or something because they were just riding Jordan Howard. And Jordan Howard had some decent games behind that offensive line, but overall didn't really produce that much. But yeah, you have only 179 rushes. So that means Miles Sanders coming in this year, it's fresh. Okay, 818 yards, 4.6 yards per carry, and 3 touchdowns rushing. Now, in the receiving game, so this is where he's super valuable in PPR sites like DraftKings, 50 catches for 509 yards, 10.2 yards per catch, and 3 touchdowns there. So he was great in PPR, top DK games. He had a game where he broke out for 38 fantasy points on DK, and then he had several other games above 20. He had 26, 22, 21, 18. Even on FanDuel, he still had 32, 24, 21, 19, 16. His price slowly went up, but it never really got super high. So this guy was a great middle tier price that was elite production, and you kind of knew it at the end of the year once Jordan Howard was injured that he was the guy. So yeah, very impressed with Miles Sanders, and he's a guy that everyone's on this year. Big things are to come for him.
Now, Brett, I want to ask you about the rest of the running back group. It's not very deep due to these changes. The only real contributor who's back on the roster is Boston Scott, because as Shane mentioned, Jordan Howard is no longer there. He signed with Miami, and he was that traditional early down back that they used. He ended up with 525 yards. He only played in 9 games, but Boston Scott, really showed some potential there late in the season. How do you feel about him as the backup to Sanders?
I'm not gonna lie. In the beginning of the season, Boston Scott cost us like a game or something, and I was anti-Boston Scott for I say a solid 5 weeks. But with the going forward, the running back core kind of scares me a little bit. It's a very young core. You have 2 extremely young players entering their second season, being on the roster, and I really do think that they need a veteran presence, like a third guy signed on there, like LaShawn McCoy or Hyde or someone that can really help them figure out what their game is. But at the same time, I'm really not that worried because Miles Sanders has shown us what he can do. He's outstanding. He's an outstanding back. He almost shows I don't want to overhype him too much, but his game reminds me a lot like Christian McCaffrey. He can do both. He can rush, he can pass, which is nice to see. But definitely, I feel like the Eagles are going to definitely sign a running back that's a veteran who's going to really help, bring this group together, because this is the group that they're going to go forward with. They're probably really going to be heavily relying on Miles Sanders to get up and down the field, with Boston Scott here and there when Miles is, worn out and tired. But I really do think that going forward from a DFS perspective, if Miles is on a hot streak, I would definitely, choose him on my Sunday lineup. That's, not just because I'm an Eagles fan, but because he has the potential to, have a 2-3 touchdown game because he's both a threat on, the running game and the passing game, which is nice to see. So,
yeah, it really is. And Shane, you had highlighted those 50 catches, which would make him really their most valuable receiver other than the tight ends because it was an absolute mess at wide receiver last year. Let's talk about that group. Alshon Jeffrey, certainly the wide receiver one in terms of name and reputation, but can't do you too much good if he's on the sidelines, and just really disappointing. 43 catches for the year and only one touchdown.
Yeah, he had a couple good games. Alshon Jeffrey actually had a DraftKings game of 31. I think that was the first game of the season when they just went off against Washington, and 23 and 22. He only played in 9 games. Some of those games he was like a hobbled decoy. The problem with this guy is he never seems to be in that great of shape. He's kind of a bigger guy, and he's not really that quick. He's relying on his size and his great hands to catch the ball. But yeah, 43 catches for 490 yards, 11.4 average, and 4 touchdowns. So not a horrible season considering he only played 9 games. But yeah, this is a guy that you have to watch and see what his conditioning's like in training camp and preseason, because with this being sort of a quarantine off season, he's a guy that's hard to trust in terms of his conditioning, his ability to produce. But like I said, he's a big target. Carson Wentz obviously trusts the guy, so he's still someone you have to keep an eye on. And then you have Deshaun Jackson, who went crazy week 1 against Washington, catches a couple bombs. He gets like 38 fantasy points. Huge, GPP play on DraftKings and FanDuel. And of course, he gets injured after that, and he's out for the rest of the year. Tried to come back at one point, couldn't make it. So he really only had one game where he played the whole thing. 9 catches, 159 yards, 2 touchdowns. I mean, that was pretty much all in that one game. So it was impressive. He still got a lot of speed and experience, and he's still a huge playmaker. He's the ultimate GPP play. He's the boomer bust play, and he's still a threat in this game. And Carson Wentz can throw a pretty good deep ball. So we're looking for Deshaun Jackson to really bounce back here in this group. What do you think about the wide receivers here, Brett?
The wide receivers was absolutely atrocious last year. The whole thing with Deshaun Jackson and Alshon Jeffrey, and I really do think the medical staff needs to get fired. I think I could have done a better job, diagnosing them. But anyway, the whole point was that this wide receiving core was an absolute disaster. We had to end up like towards the end of the season, we had basically our whole entire practice squad out there for wide receivers, and at least I could say we came out with Greg Ward. Really showed a lot of potential, a lot of promise going forward. I do like that we got rid of the dead weight like Nelson Aguilar, who just went on such a decline. But I'm really excited to see what this wide receiving core has for this year, considering that we have a healthy Deshaun Jackson, possibly a healthy Alshon Jeffrey, and then we got the Jalen Reagor coming in from the draft, solid draft pick, and it'll be exciting to see who gets the touches through that core, because as we all know, Carson Wentz loves his tight ends, so they're usually his go-to guys, especially in the red zone. Which is, if you're looking for a tight end, you usually, and if you want a guaranteed guy to get passed to a lot, Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert are there, but we'll break down that in a couple minutes. But from DFS perspective, I'm not really a huge fan of, choosing the Eagles wide receivers unless, as Shane said, it's a boomer bust play, and you have a moment where like Deshaun Jackson, where he went off for 38 points against Washington. I definitely would not target these group of guys until they prove, that they can actually be a threat. Unlike, the tight ends who are, notoriously known for being a threat. They already have a dominant 1-2 in Ertz and Goddard. So,
Yeah.
My
So
take on it.
if you look at the touchdown production, and thank you for correcting me, Shane. I was talking about Jeffrey's one rushing touchdown, but only four receiving touchdowns for Jeffrey. And then after that crazy first week for Deshaun Jackson, when he caught two touchdowns, he didn't score again. And then Aguilar was next with three receiving touchdowns. He's gone. And so then you've got Greg Ward, who really did finish well down the stretch, those last four games, basically averaging 5 catches for 50 yards. So he's um, a nice guy to have in your back pocket, sort of a security blanket. But how do you think the rest of the group is going to shake out, Shane, in terms of the three rookies headlined by Jalen Reagor and then Marquise Goodwin, who they got in a trade?
Yeah, Marquise Goodwin really kind of fell off at San Francisco last year, so we'll see. He's still a guy that you can put out there maybe in 4 wide receiver sets if you want him to do like a clear out route and create space underneath for some of these other guys. He's a deep threat, just like Deshaun Jackson. So he's a situational deep threat type guy, and we'll see if Marquise Goodwin even makes the team. I think he probably will because of his speed and experience. Really excited in the first round, 21st pick. They take Jalen Reagor. Some people thought they should have took Justin Jefferson. I think again, Jalen Reagor fits their offense. I think he's going to be able to return kicks and punts and be an explosive player in special teams. And I think he can get quite a few snaps at the slot wide receiver position, and he could line up outside if he wanted to. But I think he'll be good in the slot. His production dipped a little bit last year. They had a rookie quarterback at TCU, so I think that hurt his pass receiving production. He only had 43 catches, 611 yards for 14.2 average, and 5 touchdowns. But this is a guy who's a true burner. He's about 5'11". Interesting enough, he was up to about 206 pounds at the combine. He still ran a 4.47 speed 40, which a lot of people said that's maybe a little bit slower than what they thought he was going to run, but still elite speed. And then so because people kind of criticism of that, he did a virtual pro day workout later in April, and he was down to like a little over 197 pounds, and he ran a 4.22 at that workout. So he is a speed guy, and he's showing that I think that if he loses a little weight, that can improve his quickness as a return guy or a slot receiver. He's explosive. It's a guy that they're going to get involved in the running game again. They will get him the ball in space. He can play slot. A lot of end around jet sweeps, those type of things cause a lot of misdirections and a lot of issues. And he's a guy that can take it to the house at any time. So I think I look for big things, and I think they're going to implement him into the offense right away. He might not be a full-time player, but he will be implemented right away, and he's a big play type guy. So again, he's another one of those probably GPP type guys. Probably a FanDuel play more in DraftKings, just because I don't think he's going to be a high PPR, receptions type guy where he's going to get 8 to 10 receptions. But I could see him only needing 3 or 4 receptions to make some huge plays. So yeah, look for big things from him. Very excited about him in the wide receiver group. Not big on Greg Ward. I think Greg Ward was just somewhat successful, but if that's as good as he's going to get, being that he was the number 1 receiver last year, then I'm not interested in him with all these other guys in the mix here. And then they also drafted, while we're talking about wide receivers, John Hightower out of Boise State in the 5th round, and I thought he was a great pick as well. So this guy, 51 catches, 953 yards, 18.5 yards per catch, big play guy, 8 touchdowns. And he's also had pretty good size. He was a taller guy, not as big in terms of weight, but taller guy, 4.4 speed, and he is the 38 and a half inch vertical at the combine. And I feel like he's kind of like a Deshaun Jackson, future replacement, as just a kind of like a deep ball threat, a big play type threat. He had a good career at Boise State. So he's a developmental guy that should get in the mix there. That was a good pick.
Yeah, Brett, what do you think about that investment in speed? I think it makes sense with Reagor and Hightower because Deshaun Jackson, I mean, if we can only count on him for 1 productive week per season, that's probably not going to cut it, is it?
It's not going to cut it at all, but I definitely like that they're investing more in speed, considering that, as you said earlier, Alshon's more of a, relying on his, size, to get the ball away from defenders. And especially that JJ Whiteside's also more like, Alshon Jeffrey. So they really didn't have a ton of speed at the wide receiving position. So it was really refreshing to see that they drafted Rager and Hightower, because I do see them too making the rosters in the future, which can really, spice up on, this offseason and how, who are they going to keep, who are they not going to take, are they going to take an extra wide receiver? So it'll be really nice to see that whole group, kind of like redone and refresh. But no, I definitely like the speed. It's it's gonna open so many more doors for the offense, that they're not just heavily relying on their tight ends. They have someone who can actually go deep and open up the field a lot more. So I say it's a great investment for the future.
Now, Brett, I want to ask you about the tight ends next, because I made the claim recently that the best tight end group in the NFL is going to be down in Tampa next year with Gronk and O.J. Howard and Cameron Brate. But pound for pound, man for man, what do you think? Ertz and Goddard, is that the best tight end duo in the NFL?
If you're talking duo, yes. If you're talking trios, then I want to have to give it to Tampa. But I really do think that Ertz and Goddard are probably one of the best duo tight ends in the league, and it's really exciting to see what kind of formations they take and how they run certain plays with both of them on the field. As you know, Ertz had 134 targets. That's a lot for a tight end. He almost had 1,000 yards, 6 touchdowns. Goddard had 5 touchdowns. They both averaged about 10.5 yards, which was nice. But as well as, they are a deadly duo. Just, I feel like it's going to be a little different this year when, they're factoring in the new wide receivers that they're coming in, because they're not going to be, so heavily reliant as the tight ends as they were, previously, which can bring out, good and bad things. DFS perspective, it makes you a little worried that, Ertz is not going to have as many targets as well in the red zone, which, less points, as well as, people aren't going to roster him as much, which also brings to the point that, George Kittle is around that same price point, and we don't know what Grunk is at yet. So there is going to be a bunch of other options for, say, if they get less targets this year. So I still think they're probably one of the best duos out there. I was very excited when we drafted Goddard. We snagged him away from Dallas 2 years ago. He's probably Ertz's successor at this point. I'm not a huge fan on Josh Perkins. He's been bouncing up and down the roster. I really don't think he's going to have that much of an impact unless, say, one of the two main guys go down. I think they're just going to go with the 1-2 punch with Ertz and Goddard. That's how I feel.
Yeah. Now, Shane, I want to ask you something about from the DFS perspective and the idea of maybe playing Carson Wentz by himself in some lineups, because, Brett, you kind of touched on the various formations that the Eagles use, and sometimes they use both Ertz and Goddard. You look at the snap counts, Ertz had 80% of the snaps last year, and Goddard had 66% of the snaps. So they're out there on the field a lot. They both had, 58 catches or more. Ertz had 88. I find it hard to predict some weeks which guy is going to get in the end zone. And we already touched on how the wide receivers just weren't getting in the end zone. A lot happened on the ground. So, Shane, what do you think about playing Carson Wentz by himself, or do you think there'll be a little bit more clarity this year in terms of who you might want to stack with Wentz?
I think you read my mind, because I was just thinking about that, how I actually like Carson Wentz to run him just naked and, not necessarily stacking him, because it's really hard to rely on the boom or bust nature of Deshaun Jackson. And, Alshon Jeffrey is definitely a red zone target, but he's hard to rely on as well. And then you don't know what's going to happen with these rookies. And, so Carson Wentz with the tight end, distribution. I think Dallas Goddard that hurt Zach Ertz a little bit last year as well. So to your point, he's fully loaded with weapons now, and he's got a good offensive line. And I feel like this is the season where he can have an MVP caliber season. similar to he did I think it was 2017 when he was on that run before he went down. So so he's definitely a guy you can play in cash games with no correlation there. And then if you're going to go for a GPP, I would probably pair him with Alshon Jeffrey or Deshaun Jackson, and then one of those guys, and then probably one of the tight ends as well, depending on the pricing in your build there. But he's great for that because he can run the ball a little bit, and he's just going to put up a lot of volume. Again, you're going to want to target games where they're not heavily favored, and we're expecting a high point total. Sometimes they do get into this NFC East games, like, against the Cowboys or something like that, where it's kind of like an ugly game because the teams know each other so well. And again, I try to steer away from those games. I always bring, it's the 13-10 game, or those type of things. Not good for DFS production. So if it's a game where they're heavily favored and they're just going to give the ball to Miles Sanders, you're going to want to steer clear of Carson Wentz. But yeah, he's like I said, I'm projecting him for around top 5 quarterback production. So you could run him all day. And like you said, you're right. It's really hard to predict it, which is a compliment of how many good weapons he has and how he can spread the ball out. And that's why I think it's big things for this team this year.
Absolutely. Now, before we wrap up with the draft coverage, final thoughts there. Shane, tell everybody where they can find you on Twitter.
You can find me at DET Sports Shane, DET Sports Shane on Twitter.
And Brett?
You can find me at Duffy_DFS.
That's
the wrong way to spell it. Yeah, okay. It's DEAFY_DFS.
Excellent. And you can find me on Twitter at Language Olympic. And the full squad you can reach at DFS Coach Talk. Now, Shane, you broke down the wide receivers there, the 3 rookies that the Eagles picked up in the draft. Any other big splashes that we should be aware of in terms of DFS?
Yeah, I'm going to just break down a couple of the players in the draft. I think they had a great draft. First, before I do that, I just want to mention one thing. As we study these teams, I'm studying their roster. I'm looking for different areas I can exploit the defense. So if you're going against Philadelphia. So here's one thing I want to bring up. I'll give you an example. So I may look to exploit teams that are going up against Philadelphia. I may want to play their wide receiver 2. And the reason why is I feel like Darius Slay's probably going to so let's say they're playing, Darius Slay's probably going to shadow if it's a Pro Bowl caliber elite, top level wide receiver 1. So let's say they're playing the Cowboys, which they don't play till like more middle of the season, but Darius Slay is going to shadow Amari Cooper. He's going to match up with him again a lot. And in the slot, if you have, let's say, CeeDee Lamb in the slot, I think that they, with the guy they brought in there, Nicole Roby Coleman, I think he's a good slot corner. So now that leaves you with their weakness that I want to exploit, which is whatever guy is their second corner. It could be Avonte Maddox, Rasul Douglas, some of these young guys. I don't trust those guys. They're really not good rated for pass coverage. So that's where I would exploit someone like a Michael Gallup, right? A wide receiver 2. So I just want to bring that up as a philosophy is when you look at the makeup of the roster and the matchups, you can exploit that for a big game, and you get a guy like Michael Gallup at a decent price and have him go off for a huge, 30-plus fantasy point game because the matchup. And don't think that Doug Peterson's not looking at the same thing, because he is. That's why we're looking at this, right? And then you can also exploit them. So if you look at running backs, your first instinct is do not play running backs against the Eagles, which makes sense. But I would actually look at teams that are going to be big underdogs, so they're not going to be favored to win, and they have pass catching running backs, because I think you can exploit them in the passing game with running backs out of the backfield, those third down hurry up style running backs. So I would look to exploit PPR and DraftKings third down style running backs and teams against the Eagles, because I think their linebacker and safety group is a major weakness. And also tight ends. I would target tight ends. So again, if it's the Cowboys, maybe I'm going to stack Dak Prescott and Blake Jarwin and Michael Gallup when they play the Eagles. And I feel like the Eagles will score against them, right? So now we have a real life example. So the coach will be happy that I'm going to stack the Cowboys against them. But again, I'm going to exploit their weaknesses, right? That's what we're looking to do. You're not going to just throw the ball into Darius Slay every time, right? So look to exploit weaknesses based on the roster, and those are a few of the things I wanted to bring up. Okay. So
before you get to the draft, I really like that breakdown. I'm a little bit concerned with all that Cowboys talk that Brett might be feeling ill here, but
it's a real life example of a major division rival, and I think that's it. That I bring up that matchup because it's a perfect example, and also that those games are so critical in terms of these teams playing their chess match, and that those are the two best teams in this division by far. It's going to be them. It's going to be close, you know. So,
Brett,
but yeah,
Brett, is that a fair critique of your defense?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not the proudest of our defense, but I do have to say it's fairly fair. And I know Coach is probably going to be, smiling like a kid on Christmas, just listening to Shane talk about him targeting the Eagles. But I do have to say that's pretty fair analysis with the young cornerback group and the safeties being a different safety this year. We're going to have to really reevaluate how our defense works. So I definitely can see, wide receiver 2, tight ends, and possibly the quarterback. Shane, you can't guarantee Dak's going to hit his target every time, right? I mean, that's just.
Well, these guys are going to be so wide open that even Dak is going to be able to hit them. So.
I wouldn't doubt it. There's going to be certain parts.
You could play Ezekiel Elliott because you're thinking everyone in the DFS community is thinking, I'm not going to take Ezekiel Elliott. He's going to be running into a brick wall with that elite run defense between the tackles. All of a sudden, Ezekiel Elliott could have a game where he catches like 5 or 6 balls for 80 receiving yards and a touchdown, right? And then he just gets another red zone touchdown or something, goal line carry. So that's my point, is you can exploit that.
That is a fair assessment, though, which it kind of makes me more excited to see how the year goes on, see how our defense progresses. It's also very the one thing I really love about DFS is being able to see what other people have. So you can especially in big tournaments, you could almost put yourself in the mindset of like, oh yeah, they're targeting this team because it's not just for the Eagles, but they're targeting this team because they're not the strongest here or they're not the strongest there, and it's pretty neat to try and put yourself in their shoes and understand why they went this route or why they went that route. And one of my favorite things about DFS. But yeah, that is a fair assessment of the Eagles until I can successfully prove that they have a steady cornerback and safety core and linebackers.
So I'll just give you a couple other examples here. So if they play in week 2, the Eagles play the Rams, you could maybe target Cam Akers. If Cam Akers is looking good in terms of a receiving threat, the backfield is running back. That's a guy that it's going to be super cheap because he's a rookie. Yeah. He's in a great system. And remember what Todd Gurley used to do when he's healthy in the receiving game and how Sean McVay attacks weaknesses out of receiving running back. So that's an example. No one's on Cam Akers because they're looking at that rating and it says first rated defense against the rush, right? They're like, stay away. But all of a sudden Cam Akers goes out there and just lights him up. And then you can look at when they play the Giants twice a year, Saquon Barkley. You're like, I'm not playing Saquon. The Eagles are an elite rush defense, right? Okay, well, Saquon's capable of having a huge game just in receiving yards, right, in PPR, and he's also capable of still breaking off a big run in the running game just because he's that good. So that's my point, is that going against the kind of group thinking what people are thinking because they're so scared of the matchup, but exploiting other weaknesses in that defense. So.
Well, I love the analysis there, and we actually talked yesterday on the Cowboys podcast about the relative value of Gallup compared to Cooper and how they had basically averaged the same amount of fantasy points on DraftKings, but Gallup was about $1,000 cheaper. So really wise to target that second wide receiver against the Eagles. And Brett, it just goes back to the point you made earlier. I mean, look at the scoreboard, right? Garrett and company couldn't figure that out last year. And Jim Schwartz and company and the Eagles got that 17-9 victory at home, and that allowed them to go to the playoffs. But Shane, let's circle back here and wrap up with some draft analysis.
Yeah, so we've talked about Jalen Reagor quite a bit. I think he's going to be a multi-dimensional weapon, and I love him in this offense. I think he's a great fit. We talked about Jalen Hurts. I'm big on the pick. I know it was controversial to take him in a valuable second-round pick, but I think he's going to be a great addition to the offense. And you need a backup quarterback. It's a valuable position. Now they took in the third round linebacker Davion Taylor out of Colorado. This guy had an interesting story. He's a little bit more of an undersized guy, but he does have elite athleticism and speed. You guys probably saw I sent you the example of his RAS score, which stands for relative athletic score. And the guy tested out in the elite category. He was at 8.54 out of 10. He had a 35-inch vertical jump. He tested out really good in the broad jump, the short shuttle. So basically he showed great explosion grade, great agility, and elite speed at 4.49 at the combine and 4.39 in the 40-yard dash. So he's a little bit undersized at only 228 pounds, about 6 foot, but he can actually move around the formation and kind of play that Malcolm Jenkins role in the box as well. And he should be able to cover better. This guy had an interesting story. He wasn't able to play very much in high school, even though he was on the football team because of his religion prohibited from him playing on like Fridays and Saturdays. Yeah, some weird story. I don't know exactly the details of it, but anyway, so he was a late bloomer. He's a developmental kind of raw athlete that they'll develop. So then when he went to college at Colorado, he got his mom to, adjust the schedule for the what days he can play, and he was allowed to play on Saturdays then. So yeah, I mean the guy could rush the passer, and he can just move all around the formation. And like I said, he's an elite athlete. So it's a guy that developed, and they are really light on the linebacker position. So it was a position of need and a high upside guy. Safety Kevon Wallace had a lot of experience at Clemson. He had a great season, won the national championships at Clemson. So he was a great pick in the 4th round. And who did you say that he was that there was a connection there, Brett, with Kevon Wallace in the Eagles?
Yeah, Kevon Wallace was really close to Brian Dawkins' son at Clemson. So when he got drafted, Brian Dawkins was tweeting out, treat my boy Wallace right. He's going to put in all the work. He's really going to bring his talent to Philadelphia. And it really was neat to see because I can't remember the last time an Eagles legend was so hyped up about a certain player, but it was pretty cool seeing that Eagles connection and seeing how Wallace performed in college. It got me really excited, but I'm not going to, be too overly excited until I can see his production on the field. But he's definitely got big shoes to fill now that he's close to Brian Dawkins. So we'll see how it works.
Yeah, I mean they really need help at the safety position there. Like you said, I think that it's going to be probably Rodney McLeod and Jalen Mills starting there because Jalen Mills will be able to cover a little bit, and Will Parks. So Kevon Wallace is a guy that they'll throw in special teams. The problem with him at Clemson is he didn't have very good movement skills and very good coverage skills. So you kind of worry about him being on an island out there in coverage there. And again, if he is played, then we'll exploit that matchup because I don't think he's going to be that great in coverage there. And then they also took another SEC big guy, the offensive lineman Jack Driscoll, who could be a good swing offensive tackle, like a backup tackle there. And he's a really tall, lengthy guy. He's a developmental guy. He needs to add strength still, but he was really solid at Auburn. So that's another developmental guy. And then we talked about John Hightower. A lot of people thought that was one of their better picks because they got him in the 5th round, and he could end up being a starting wide receiver caliber and kind of take over for Deshaun Jackson because Deshaun Jackson's obviously not getting any younger, right? Even though he's still a pretty good athlete. And then linebacker Sean Bradley out of Temple, another guy that was a pretty solid linebacker there, developmental, trying to build the depth there. And then they got another fast guy in the 6th round, wide receiver Quays Watkins out of Southern Mississippi, and he had 55 catches last year for over 1,000 yards, 18.6 average, and 5 touchdowns. He was a 4.3 speed guy. So they got a lot of these guys that are smaller build, super fast, 4.3, 4.4 speed, but they struggle with press coverage. That's what the trend is, what I'm seeing with these younger guys. So you got to scheme them open, which I think Doug Peterson will be good at doing that. So that was the main draft picks I wanted to highlight. They had a ton of draft picks. They were moving around the board, a lot of late round picks, but you can see they're going to try to build through the draft, and this team is set up to win right now, in my opinion.
Well, Brett, it sounds like a pretty strong draft class overall to me, one that's really built towards winning that NFC East and maybe pulling off a sweep of the Cowboys this year. Any final thoughts for Coach before we wrap up?
What do you mean? The Cowboys are going to be the best team ever. They're probably going to go undefeated, according to Cowboys fans, right? I just think the low blows keep coming.
My job security, Cowboys are definitely going to win both games this year. I'm just kidding. This especially with this draft class, the Eagles are really trying to build their depth with the young guys and bringing speed to the table. It's going to be a really exciting year. And Coach, we're going to watch these games together so we can, have fun. And, I get to hear you say, this is our year, and then get smoked by the Eagles. So that's all I got to say for you.
Excellent. Well, it's been fun having you on, Brett, our Eagles man. So thanks for joining us today. We are going to continue our NFL virtual tour tomorrow as Mike and Santino will start to break down the AFC West. This completes our analysis of the NFC. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Please do continue to tune in on a daily basis. Check us out at DFSCoachTalk.com. We hand build all of our lineups. We use the eye test. We provide full lineups on FanDuel for our members in NFL, NBA, and MLB, along with the KBO. And we do very deep player analysis for our player pool on DraftKings that we provide to our members as well. So thank you all for your support. Give us a thumbs up or like wherever you're listening. And if you're not watching, you can find us on YouTube for these daily videos. Again, this was our first three-way video for an NFL podcast, so it was a lot of fun. And once again, on behalf of Brett Trimble and Shane Caldwell, I am Andre Hanson. Thank you so much for tuning in, and be sure to check us out again tomorrow for the next episode of DFS Coach Talk.